Anyone had that experience where you collaborate and everyone shows up and they show up so wholeheartedly in the beginning, and then it all seems to go into this like pear shape? And believe me, I tried that so many times. In actual fact, I have got a PhD in organizing amazing humans to come together and having it fall into a messy human heap. And it was really from that place that all of this life experience, my exposure to Bucky, deep exposure to Bucky Fuller's work, so very much applied exposure, not theoretical, plus the life experience, plus really wanting to convene people, beautiful people who had bold, amazing ideas to do magnificent work. And it just wasn't creating anything. We weren't making traction, the messy human heap. It didn't seem to be making any difference. And so it was really only through my own very dark night, which was not that long ago, where it became a very clear choice. Was I going to spend my time trying to fix the broken, or was I going to take a stand for the future that I know that we can create? And because I was in such a dark place, the choice was kind of like, was I going to live or was I not going to live anymore? And that's kind of sounds pretty radical, but I think we have that option every day. And so Syntropic came out of that. It came out of, we have this magnificent university that has been operating and functioning with exquisite capability for billions of years. And yet when it comes to human coordination and human design and so on, we ignore it almost completely, or we have until this point. And there are beautiful humans around the world who are definitely working more in this area of applying the laws, the working laws of nature and so on, the organizing principles to two things. Bucky was probably one of the most advanced in that area because he challenged every single system, economics, monetary, capital, architecture, the built environment, human coordination, etc. So it wasn't like there was just this one space that he looked at. He challenged every single one. But what he wanted to do was he wanted to understand the laws of universe, the principles of universe, and how to apply them. And he was applying them to the built environment, to architecture and so on. Whereas my work has been in applying them to how we coordinate humans, how we do the human relational dynamic. And so rather than talk about it as this thing out there, I'd like to give you a couple of experiences of that in this short little piece. And Colleen, you can give me a time check because I forgot to look at when I started. Okay, so thank you. And so many of you may have heard of this term synergy. And by the way, Buckminster Fuller, he coined the term. So he was just as he coined the term syntropy, he coined the term synergy. He was not afraid of creating new language for a new world. And so synergy is often really misunderstood. So let me give you the description, and don't get blown away by it because it's very wordy and hard to grasp. I'm going to break it down for you. So the actual definition of synergy means that the behavior of the whole cannot be understood by examination of the parts separately. The behavior of the whole cannot be understood by an examination of the parts separately. So now I'm going to break it down so that you can understand what that jumble of words means. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. I'm going to give you a chemistry example, a metallurgical example, and a human example. So if you take a poisonous gas and an an explosive metal, a poisonous gas and an explosive metal. If you're Einstein or Einstein's current equivalent, and you understand the absolute intricacies of an explosive metal and a poisonous gas separately, you cannot determine that when we put the two together, we get a harmless or mostly harmless white powder that we sprinkle on our food. Table salt. So you cannot examine the parts to understand what happens when it comes together. No amount of examining a caterpillar can determine a butterfly. We all know that one. The principles of metallurgy, which is that things are stronger, is putting those components, often very brittle substances, and some that are not so strong, and putting them together and creating metal that has a tensile strength far, far greater, like exponentially greater than the metals on their own. That's synergy. So at the human level, well, let's start at the individual level. Who's ever had the personal experience of knowing the wholeness of who you are, but being judged or determined for parts of you? Yeah. Now that judge or determining can have a monetary value, it can have a relational value, it can have a community value, it can have a social value, but we eliminate the beauty of the wholeness of us in the way we do our work and engagement in the world. It's built into the systems that we have by design. It's built in by design. And so when people get the opportunity to be seen in their wholeness, which is the experience that we've been going through in the synergistic audit, and to know that you can actually bring this, what happens then is we get a synergistic response. So let me give you the kind of the backwards definition of synergy. And that means that if you take 1 + 1 + 1, so remember, it's the behavior of the whole cannot be determined by an examination of the parts separately. These are the parts separately. 1 person, 2 people, 3 people. You take 3 people and create an ecology for synergy, then the total of that, and this is mathematical, but the total of that has to be greater than 3. In actual fact, not only is it greater than 3, but synergy means that it's got to be so much greater. So 10 is kind of at the bottom end. Exponentially, it can be 1,000 times greater. And many of you may have had the experience of working with a group of people where synergy was evident or present, either by design deliberately or happenstance, where collectively working together, what came out of that blew everyone's minds. Do I have people who have that experience? Anyone had that experience where you have had this synergistic response and you all just sit there in awe, jaws on the ground, and you go, how did that happen? And you recognize that no one's contribution was smaller or insignificant. It took every single one to have that synergistic response. So the question then is, how do we create ecologies where synergy is just normal practice? It happens every day. It happens all the time. And because Bucky would say that this is the principle of principles, it's kind of like the lead principle. When we don't have synergy operating in our lives, when we don't have this operating, we're actually almost cutting ourselves off from this infinite potential. And so the don't have synergy operating in our lives, let me give you a very classic example, is the leader who has to figure it out for themselves. That's their story. I need to figure it out for themselves. The moment that is the story, I need to figure it out for myself, I need to do it on my own, I need to carry this, we're actually cutting ourselves off from one of the principles of the way nature universe works. and we're cutting ourselves off from the potential of synergy. And so one of the things that I say is that the greatest exponential technology that we have on the planet on any scale is communities of humans working synergistically. Because in that ecology, there is no problem that we have that we cannot solve. There's nothing that we cannot do together. So the question then is, how do we create ecologies of synergy? And a large part of what we do in the masterclass is how do we create that? Because what we don't want to have happen is we don't want to have beautiful, wholehearted humans who really care about something coming together and having it fall into a messy human heap. What we want is to have wholehearted, beautiful humans be able to bring their agency to community around a purpose that they care about, that creates synergy for a world with a future. Now that's a lot of language, but you know, that's really behind the work that we're doing with the masterclass, is to do that. So that's one of the principles. That's one of the principles. It's a fundamental core principle. I know myself that what happens in the syntropic community is anytime I think I need to be the person with the answers, that's rubbish. That bring it to the community, and I'm just gobsmacked every single time where it goes, how much better it is, how much bigger it is, how much I just humbles me every single day that happens. Of course, we need to have the ability to step aside and allow that to happen. So there's a whole lot of personal development work that goes in there as well. But that's synergy. Do you want me to talk a little bit about source idea, Colleen? Yeah, okay. So source, one of the things, and we sort of open the masterclass with this, ideas, beautiful. I love ideas. Anyone ideas person? Ideas. Ideas are these wonderful things. You can have we have ideas all the time. Like I just had an idea that I need to have a sip of water. That was an idea backed by action. So, but when if we are a steward of an idea that animates us to act in the world. So let me give you some parameters. The idea won't let you alone. It can be lurking around in the back of your head for weeks or years or decades. It's kind of like it just won't let you alone. Sometimes it doesn't have a shape or anything else like that. It just has this sort of qualities to it. And sometimes it's about timing. We have to hold the idea like a germinate, like a seed, gestate, hold it so that it has time to mature. We as the steward have time to mature, and the world around us has time to mature towards the capacity to hold that idea. But a source idea, and the reason I use the language source, and I learned about specificity of language from Bucky Fuller, is that if we are the steward of the idea of a source idea, it arrives with us as an individual. Sometimes it can definitely arrive with a group of people if they're all together collectively. But more often than not, the idea arrives with the individual. Then that individual is the steward of that source idea. I say source because on the moment of its arrival, it has qualities and there's an experience. It doesn't have to be complete. It's definitely not perfect, but it is. If it's an idea that is going to have you act in the world towards its unfolding, you cannot not do it. You have to do it. You have to move with it. That idea at the moment of inception has what we call pattern integrity to the idea. a set of qualities and particularities and elements that cannot be violated under any circumstance. So the best way I can describe this, that some of you may understand, is if you're parents and you've got children or you've had children, or if you're animal lovers and you've had animals, that each living being, no matter if you've got several children from the same genetic pool, whatever that is, each living being has its own pattern integrity. You have your own pattern integrity. It can manifest in a million different forms, but you will recognize or see the pattern integrity. It's like a thread that goes through the whole of your expression. And oftentimes in our current model of education and so on, that pattern integrity can be squashed. We can be advised that the expression in a particular way is not good for you or not good for whatever it is, capitalism or making money or, a whole bunch of things. This is why we need Colleen as a career coach to get back to the source of your own pattern integrity. An idea is the same. An idea has its own pattern integrity, and the steward of the source idea is a fierce guardian of that pattern integrity. So let me see if I can give you a really good example. If you are a baker, I'm a baker, I like to bake. If you're a baker and you want to open an artisanal bakery, beautiful handcrafted pastries, for example, and that idea won't let you alone. So you create this gorgeous experience, amazing quality ingredients, amazing products, etc., etc. And you put it out in the world. And then commercialism says the butter that you are using is too expensive. You need to use a lesser quality. Or you need to cut corners over here. Or you need to downgrade this or take less time to do that, etc., etc. And so over a period of time, your pattern integrity of that idea gets eroded and eroded and eroded. And then one day you wake up and you look at it, go, it doesn't look anything like I held from the beginning. That's when we allow the pattern integrity of the source idea to be violated. So part of the work that we do in Centropic world is not only naming the moment of inception of your source idea, because it has an energy and a feel to it and an understanding to it, but also really being clear about what the pattern integrity is, and then fiercely protecting that. Where we get unstuck is trying to impose our form, as in my form, Christine's form, onto the idea, versus being the steward of that idea, allowing it to take the form it needs to take to maintain the pattern integrity. So going back to the child, if you have a vastly musical child, for example, they're just naturally musical. Giving them, if you can, if you have access, and we actually, with music, we have access because you just need tin cans and funny thing. You don't need pianos and fancy, etc. You know, a whole different way. Voices, tin cans, toys, tools, etc. can be found in any community to give that child exposure to all sorts of different musical expressions and allow them to shape the musical expression that needs to come out, that is the form of their pattern integrity themselves. It's the same with an enterprise. It's the same if we're stewarding an enterprise. It needs to be birthed in the form that it needs versus the form that we want, because it has its own aliveness and it needs us as stewards to bring it alive. It needs people. An idea is nothing unless people and artifacts and tools and community nurture it into existence. But our job as the steward of the source idea is to protect fiercely the pattern integrity. And to, if there is, like if we go back to the bakery experience, how do we have that? How do we enable that quality and handcraftedness to stay, even as forces against it says we need to do something else? And is it appropriate to cut corners to become the next McDonald's of bakery? Or is that, in the doing of that, going to violate the very reason why you started it in the first place? And so the tension between the forces that we have saying that this is what is needed for commercial, consumer, product, et cetera, all of those tensions are brought up at the interface of stewarding and protecting the pattern integrity. And that's where we go, that's where we get to be incredibly creative, particularly as a community, and going, how do we keep this while the current models want us to change it? And what can we do to keep that alive? That's the innovation that occurs, is to keep that alive. So I know I've given you a very short sort of taste in a very short amount of time. Just one other thing to say about the source idea is that not everyone is a steward of a source idea. There are people out there that have source ideas that you fall in love with and you go, I want to be part of that. And that comes back to then how do we coordinate, create the human coordination that has your contribution to somebody else's source idea be met with such a level of dignity and respect for your contribution as we're bringing that to life. And all of that lives within a syntropic enterprise. So the sort of underlying pattern integrity of syntropic world is zero exploitation, zero exploitation. Zero extraction to extinction, extraction of our own soul essence, extraction from out there in the world, extraction from the planet, the land, whatever you want to look at, and zero colonization. And so colonization we know from this country did this, but also colonization is when someone takes your idea and claims it and names it and owns it without recognition of your contribution. That's a form of colonization. And so those sort of three underlying principles live behind everything that we do. So it's that plus how do we create a world that works for 100% of humanity without ecological offense or the disadvantage of anyone? And I reached a place where it was like, if I'm not asking that question as the central organizing question of my existence, I don't want to be here, because that works for me. And I think it's time that we started to really look at those type of questions for a world that we know is possible.